CBC has just obtained new documents from Elections Canada's investigation into Ontario Conservative MP, Parliamentary Secretary to the Prime Minister, Dean Del Mastro. This is in regards to his election spending in the 2008 campaign. The Prime Minister stood up to defend Dean Del Mastro just today. Terry Molesky is here to update us on these new documents. Terry, we've been following this story for a while. What new documents do you have, and what do they show?
Well, basically, this is a sworn affidavit sworn out by an Elections Canada investigator named Thomas Ritchie. It's not criminal charges. It's important to emphasize. Nobody's laying any charges. However, it is a sworn affidavit which basically takes direct aim at Dean Del Mastro and accuses him of personal complicity in a scheme to overspend and to cover up that overspending on his 2008, not 2011, his 2008 election campaign. Basically what this is called an information to obtain. It lays out why the investigator believes this happened, and it all boils down to spending, ironically enough, on robocalls, that is to say voter ID calls, phone calls in great numbers, get out the vote calls made by a company called Hollinshed, run by a gentleman by the name of Frank Hall, who basically told Elections Canada that the returns filed, the campaign expense returns filed by the Del Mastro campaign were fraudulent. And having investigated, this investigator, Mr. Ritchie, says he believes it. I'll take you down to the key paragraph in this information to obtain. He says, and I quote, this is Mr. Ritchie, "This contract with a value of $21,000 should correctly have been reported in the Dean Del Mastro return as an election expense. However, the return only reported an election expense of $1,575 as being paid to Hollinshed. The amount of $1,575 was supported by an invoice supplied by Hollinshed at Dean Del Mastro's request." Then he goes on, and this is where it gets pretty painful. Frank Hall, president of Hollinshed, stated to me that Hollinshed never provided any services in respect to this invoice, and Hollinshed was never paid. Finally, he says the $21,000 contract with Hollinshed was paid by Dean Del Mastro from his personal bank account in a manner that facilitated the concealing and misreporting of elections expenses and contributions. That was filed at the end of November of last year.
So let's just there's a lot in there.
Yeah.
We'll just slow down. So we'll go over it real quickly again. Terry Molesky has just obtained these Elections Canada documents. I should say a couple things. Dean Del Mastro has yet to see these Elections Canada documents, which he said. The Prime Minister stood up and said he's filed all his returns from 2008, and they were correctly processed. These documents, however, show an Elections Canada investigator clearly having enough evidence in his mind, as you say, to say that this $21,000 should have been filed on the election return and wasn't. Is that the upshot?
That's correct, and he provides a lot of the surrounding detail which might otherwise have provided some wiggle room for Dean Del Mastro. For example, the check for $21,000 that came from his personal bank account was dated August. Well, that was before the election. As you know, he was on your show, Evan, very recently, or as soon as this thing broke, to say that, well, it wasn't all election spending. There was only a small amount that actually is on the election account. The problem in this information to obtain is that they're talking about work that was entirely, the whole $21,000, done for the campaign, during the campaign, and that $21,000 check wasn't deposited in August. It was only deposited in October. So do you think they held it? Yeah, it wasn't after the election. In other words, it may have been backdated, is the suggestion, to cover his trail.
Again, and Mr. Del Mastro has just sent us a statement, okay? So he's in the House voting right now. So now we're going to get some news. I've just got a statement from Mr. Del Mastro. Let me show it to you right now. This coming in literally about 3 minutes ago. As we said, you're coming on. "My statements for both the campaign and the association accurately reflect all of their activities. They have been professionally audited and reviewed, and a matter of public record for almost 4 years. Any expenses that I personally incurred on their behalf have been refunded." We also should say that he has pointed out that the company, Hollinshed here, sued Mr. Del Mastro over this payment, and they lost. It got tossed out. So clearly there's a relationship. That's what Mr.
Something went sour, obviously, after the election. There was a dispute over money. Frank Hall alleges, he hasn't proved it, that he backdated invoices and was party to a cover-up that was engineered by Del Mastro to cover up this alleged overspending. So there's a lot that's still unproven here, and we should also mention that there are a couple of checks going back into Del Mastro's account discovered by the Elections Canada investigator, repayments allegedly to him, both in the amount of about $11,000. Suggesting that his overpayment was refunded, so he didn't personally overpay. Maybe the campaign did, but we cannot trace whether those two $11,000 checks actually came from the campaign. We don't know, and Elections Canada doesn't know where those checks came from.
All right. Terry Malefsky, and hats off to our other colleague, Laura Payton, who did yeoman service getting these documents as well. Terry will have a lot more on this on the National tonight. But new questions about Dean Del Mastro's spending emerging as Elections Canada documents from the investigator now finally coming to light. We've seen court documents before. Now we're finding out exactly what Elections Canada is investigating as this situation deepens a little. Terry Malefsky will have more on that on the National tonight.